if you're looking at a new medical device, for instance, it's the first time that provider has gone through that buying journey. So they're trying to assess the device. They're trying to assess the impact it would have, how they're going to train people on it, what the implications are of using that device over whatever they're using today. So they're going through that for the first time. The salesperson has seen many other organizations going through that same journey. They can help them navigate that path.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite, and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
Today, we are going to be speaking with Martyn Lewis, founder and CEO at Market Partners and Hayes. On this episode of Power Supply, we're going to be discussing the buying and selling process, how sellers sell, and why buyers buy, and why they don't. We're going to hear about Martyn's book on the topic, some extensive research that he's done for greater than 20 years, and he's going to share some of those insights with us.
I could listen to Martyn actually read the phone book. This guy is phenomenal. I want everybody to stick around and listen, but also he has great insight. He's been doing this for years. I think he told us he'd done over 5,000 interviews with hospital executives and buyers. And so he's a fascinating guy, has a lot of really good insight. So stick around and listen.
Yeah. The supplier community out there that listens to this show, I think you're going to get a lot of value over shifting your perspective. And for people on the provider side, what it's like to start thinking about how you go through your buying process. So why does it take a while for so many products to come onto the market and actually get into implementation? We're going to learn all about that today. The juice is worth the squeeze on this episode. Stay with us.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
A production of 17 Studios. You're listening to Power Supply.
Today we have the pleasure of speaking with Martyn Lewis, founder and CEO at Market Partners. And we're going to be talking about the psychology of buying and selling, how sellers sell, and why buyers buy. And when we're talking about supply chain, it's basically the two sides of the table, as everybody loves to say in the industry. I've been on both sides of the table. But Martyn, you've got some really great things to talk about today that are some insights, some research, what you've learned over your career. And I think it's going to be really eye-opening for everybody who listens to this episode. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today.
Justin, it's a pleasure to be here. And I think you'll discover it's a passion of mine that I've studied for several decades.
Hey, Mark, before I get started, this is Hayes here. I've got to ask. I mean, you don't sound like I do. So you got to give me a little bit of background. Where did you come up with that wonderful accent first?
It's, the accent, they say it really helps me in my consulting career. Now, I'm not sure about that, but British, and I was born in the West Country. So originally I had that West Country R accent. Then I moved into the Midlands, which rounded that out. Then 18 years in Canada and now 22 years in California. And I can tell you I pick up accents fairly quickly. So I've got that rounded out accent where I have an accent wherever I go.
That's a lot of places to live to only be 38 years old. I'm impressed.
I know. I started when I was very young. Yeah. If only I was 38. Although I like to convince myself I am.
Well, don't we all?
So, Martyn, why don't you talk about just your experience? And, obviously a lot of this is going to be a conversation around, marketing insights, but it's also how we do business in healthcare, not just, globally how people sell and how people buy, but very much, insights into healthcare from your research. So how do you get, from overseas to Canada to the United States and conduct all of this market research that you're going to be sharing today?
Well, like I said, I'm not 38 years old, so it's been many years. But my background, in fact, I'll go with the country thing, because in the UK, my background was, I was a software engineer. My background was programming and that kind of stuff, which probably is relevant because it tells you I've got that analytical side to me. Then I moved to Canada and decided that I really need to get sales on my resume, in fact, sales management on my resume, because I felt that's really a part of the world I was missing. So I moved into sales back in 1981, went through all the classical sales training, and kind of took that analytical view of, okay, how am I successful in sales? Then 25 years ago, so up to that point, I continued through sales into marketing. I was vice president of sales, vice president of marketing. I was in a CEO where I had 700 salespeople working for me, and then started my own company 25 years ago. And one of my early clients, just a little over 20 years ago, was involved in healthcare. And indeed, more than half of my business is healthcare around the world today. Healthcare is kind of the dominant industry we work with. And he had a young startup company. They'd been around for 5 years. They had what I would consider to be a really great offering, but they weren't getting the traction in the marketplace that they deserved. So the CFO, I remember him saying, what's wrong with my sales force? Only a fool wouldn't buy this service that we're offering. And indeed, they were offering hospitals what you would consider to be a no-brainer service. So he said to me, why don't you talk to some of our customers and prospects and find out why they're not buying? And I thought, well, that sounds like an interesting idea. And as a third party, we could be independent. So we talked to CFOs and hospital staff about why they were or were not buying. And it was incredibly revealing. And indeed, we could put together a new strategy for that company, and they grew exponentially, largely as a result of the strategy that we put together based on talking to their customers about how they buy. We then repeated that trick for 5 years before we realized this is something that is very important, that it's that combination. If you're selling and you don't know how somebody's buying, you're not going to be too successful. So we made it our mission 15 years ago to look for every time we engage with a company to look at how their market buys, not why they buy, but how they buy and why they may not.
That's really interesting. And you said that the majority of your business is in healthcare, but obviously much of it still is not. And so I always like to ask this question once we're talking to somebody who, has been working in a lot of different industries. How is healthcare different from those industries when it comes to buying and purchasing new products? What do you see as sort of like some commonalities and differences there?
There is a difference. And there's a difference not just between healthcare and other industries. There's a difference between healthcare today and healthcare 10 years ago, or even 5 years ago. So that there are differences. One of the things that we see is healthcare is very fast to adopt certain things and very slow to adopt other things. I think COVID showed how fast healthcare can move when it has to. But at other times, healthcare moves very, very slowly.
So I've experienced that. And Hayes, I bet, earlier in your career too, you would experience that. There were just times I felt like, working in a sales role that I had no traction. And then all of a sudden, everything would hit at once. And you read like books like Malcolm Gladwell's about the tipping point, and you like to think it's the tipping point, but I'm almost wondering, maybe it's not the tipping point. Maybe it has something to do with how buyers buy and how that's changing. And it just all of a sudden comes to the right head where everybody just starts moving forward. But I've seen it come in waves. Is that at all what you're describing?
It absolutely does. There are waves of adoption of any new product, service, technology protocol. That's going to happen. So it's quite predictable. Consumer packaged goods have been managing this for decades. They'll look at how people start buying a new product, and they'll watch the phases that things go through, the market maturation curve as it's known. They'll watch how the early adopters start to buy something, and then how it moves to the early adopters, then into what's called the early majority, or pragmatists, and then how it moves into the later majority. And that is the tipping point. The tipping point is often when you've got about 7 or 8% of the market will start to follow suit much quicker. So there is absolutely a tipping point, and it is around 7 or 9%, which sounds low, but that does mean that almost 1 in 10, in our case, hospitals, providers, would have to be using that product for it to reach that tipping point.
All right, Martyn, I've got a question there, but before I go there, Justin, I figured you were going to say the tipping point was because of your superior sales skill. And that's the reason that it just went exponential. And so I thought that's where you're going, but maybe not.
Sales guys that are okay, but still have a lot of drive start companies.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll go with that.
All right. So I digress a lot. All right, Martyn, but so this is fascinating to me. And so what role do you see in the GPOs as it relates to that tipping point? You know, you're at 7, 8, 9%, and then all of a sudden it might go up to 20 or 30. But do GPOs play a role in that? If I get an agreement, in other words, what does that do, if any, in your experience and your research?
Often people call that the hunting license. That you can't go and hunt for business unless the GPO has approved you. That it's going to be a very, very tough battle to sell to a provider if you're not on the GPO approved list. Once you're on the GPO list, it doesn't mean that it's easy. It just means that you can go hunt. You can go and find opportunities. You can present yourself.
Now, we were just talking about how healthcare is different from other industries and the pace of play, sometimes moving very quickly when it has to. I'd say, working as a provider, not in a sales role, that a lot of times we were very reactionary. You tried to be proactive, but the nature of healthcare is that there's also a lot of surprises. And so even as clinicians, we would motivate for the emergency, for the oversight, plug the gap, don't let it happen again. And that was often when it would happen. Think about the way Joint Commission oftentimes creates that process improvement that everybody you knew was needed, but until they have a citation, they don't do. That happens, a lot of times as well. Not all the time, but it does happen frequently. So the other thing we hear hospitals say is, we're not, we're different. We're not like those other hospitals. And there's a saying out there that sort of runs parallel to what they're saying, which is if you've seen one hospital, you've seen exactly one hospital. Do you feel that, especially as it relates, and we're kind of going to dive a little bit deeper into these common themes and your findings from the research in a second, but do you find that hospitals, when it comes to buying, really are that different from each other? Is it true? Is it false? Partly true?
Now you're really going to put me on the spot, Justin, because they do like to think that they're different, and they are, of course, and they're not. When we map buying journeys, we find hospital after hospital, provider after provider, GPO after GPO go through exactly the same journey. The same roles get involved, the same concerns, like maybe infection control is going to get involved. They're going to have the same concerns and the same worldview as the next hospital. We see it time and time again. So yes, there are differences, and it's important to understand those differences. But overall, we find the dynamics are remarkably similar.
So Martyn, you just kind of alluded to the sales journey and mapping that. And so I think what you're getting at is that the sales journey isn't going to be that different from one hospital to another, but how you navigate it, maybe as the representative that is working with that organization, you might navigate that sales journey a little bit differently. But overall, the path and who needs to be involved and the information that needs to be communicated is going to be very similar for one to another.
That's exactly right. And let me extend on that as well and talk about what I think the opportunity is for the salesperson, and I think for the provider as well. If you're looking at a new medical device, for instance, it's the first time that provider has gone through that buying journey. So they're trying to assess the device. They're trying to assess the impact it would have, how they're going to train people on it, what the implications are of using that device over whatever they're using today. So they're going through that for the first time. The salesperson has seen many other organizations going through that same journey. they can help them navigate that path. So when we see the differences, a lot of that is because the hospital or provider is going through that for the first time. So they're going through not necessarily what you call a buying journey. They're going through a learning journey. They're going, oh, wow, if we use this device over what we're using today, we're going to have to train people differently. Or the physician's assistants will have to do this. It's going to change our workflow. They're working that all out as they go along. So they're on this voyage of discovery. So it can appear like random, unique activity. It's only that because they're on a voyage of discovery. So the opportunity we have is for the salesperson who's seen multiple other providers go through that same journey to help them understand all the implications and all they're going to have to do.
I love that, Martyn. I mean, I think that's so valuable that they could offer that. But I'm going to step back even one step back in the journey, and that's just getting the attention of the hospital. And that is one of the things that, man, do I get, that comes up all the time with me and the companies that we work with is, hey, no one will even return my phone call. No one will return an email. Give me your take on that piece. How do you get the attention to begin this journey?
And yes, you're so right. And what I find even more frustrating is when I talk to executives of companies and they say, wow, if only we could get in front of the CNO or the C-suite and they understood what we were doing, there'd be a no-brainer. They'd buy. That is simply not true. The core of the issue that you allude to there, Hayes, is that they are overwhelmed with people trying to bring new stuff to them. And it's all good. It's all good. And this is part of the problem which we've got to acknowledge, that there's literally dozens, hundreds of organizations trying to knock on the door and bring new devices, new approaches, new drugs, new protocols, new services to their door. So they are turning that off. So that is definitely the issue. So all of those cold call and mass marketing techniques that people adopt are really, I would say 99% of them are going to fail. The only way you can get attention is through a very deliberate and thoughtful strategy of how are you going to bring relevance to somebody and value to somebody right now. Not just ask for their time, not just tell them that you can help them save lives or reduce costs, because then everybody's doing the same thing. You've got to have pinpoint, targeted focus. Exactly what value are you bringing? How can you be relevant to somebody right now?
Was that part of some of the common themes that you learned from the research? You were talking about working with a company when this all started, but you haven't really talked about the research project, like how you conducted it, other than just speaking with their customers to figure out why they weren't buying their product. But then you started rolling it out after 5 years and really, or over 5 years and really repeating it. So, what really came to bear that was like, this is what we learned consistently. We could count on things being this way. And was that insight one of them?
Yeah. We look at every buying journey as a very specific, unique buying journey. So if you're bringing a new device, drug, protocol, service to market, you've got to understand exactly how people would approach buying that, not why they would buy it. And everybody's got that. And they're right. They know why somebody should buy what they're offering. What they don't know is how they're going to. And that's what we map. So our research goes in, talks. We don't do focus groups. We don't do surveys. We do very deep one-on-one interviews with buyers and people that are involved in the overall buying journey.
So where they found out about the information, why it even came up to them to begin with that it might be something that they should be looking for. So can I ask this distinction then? Are the buyers typically already decided what they want to get? And if your product and service isn't really what they're looking for, that you're automatically out of sync from the start?
Absolutely. So the buying journey usually starts way before the sales journey, which is why we actually encourage our clients to forget the whole notion of a sales process. The only process that gets you business is the buying process. And you're often coming into it at step 4 or step 5. And they put it in their pipeline at step 1. We go, no, it's actually at step 4. You just haven't been involved at step 1, 2, and 3. So yes, we're looking at the entire life cycle a buyer would go through from the very first time they see that there's an opportunity, a need, something could change, something needs to change, right the way through how they develop that, how they gain interest, how they then go into a commitment, how they acquire, and then how they adopt and become a successful user and maybe an advocate. That is the whole journey. And salespeople are usually involved from about 50% of the way through it. And the statistic that we share is salespeople are involved in less than 10% of all the activities in the buying life cycle.
Wow, that's gonna that could hurt some people's feelings right there, Martyn.
It should. Do you want to know why business doesn't close as forecasted?
Love it.
The answer. Yep. There's things going on behind the scenes where people, your champion, who you think is the champion, that heck, this won't have to go to the VAC committee because this physician has got, like, he's so well respected, it won't go to the VAC committee. It will. It will. You're betting on an outlier. And so all those things are going on behind the scene. The CNO's getting involved. The union's getting involved. We've seen all this kind of things in real life. The salesperson is forecasting the business. They've got the, yes, it's going to happen, just need to do some things. Then all that work that goes on inside the organization. And one of the big things is, what are the implications? If we go ahead with this, which we know is the right thing to do, we know this is going to save us money and save lives. It's the right thing to do. But it implies, what does it imply? It implies we're going to have to train people. It implies that maybe we have to break a contract with another supplier. It implies it implies all these sorts of things. That's what's going on behind the scenes. That's what I think the opportunity is for salespeople to engage.
Interesting. I've always thought that one of your biggest competitors is just the status quo, right?
In healthcare, and I'm going to go back to a point, because when I say healthcare is slow, I don't want to diss healthcare here. There's a reason it's slow. If they adopted every new product and service that came along that saved the money and saved lives, if they adopted everyone, they'd be doing nothing else all day long but introducing new stuff into the organization. So there is a reason it's slow. It is slow because patients' lives are at stake. So status quo, if it works, even if we know, and we have seen so many examples of this, where providers know that if they change to this drug, this device, this service, they are going to save money and save lives, but they don't, or they push it out because it implies other things.
And the interesting role with supply chain is they've got to navigate all the providers that are ultimately the ones that need to be trained. Certainly supply chain doesn't have time to make sure that that happens. Their involvement is on the front end, but they're looking for value add and support and those kinds of vendor or supplier, support mechanisms to make sure that they can be successful with those initiatives, because they don't want to bet on something that doesn't work, because then they've put in all that time, right? So we've got this supply chain audience, and I kind of want to ask you this question interestingly, because I think most of them know how they buy, right? But they are doing it every single day, wash, rinse, repeat. So tell our supply chain audience something about themselves that they probably inherently know, but it's just how they exist every day that maybe it's not on the forefront of their mind, that would really give them a good insight into, their part in this process. We spent a lot of time talking about the selling to them, and they get sold to every single day. I think they get this fatigue. So tell us something from their perspective that they might not even realize is happening.
I think there's two things that I would look at. The first one is looking at what we look at. Exactly all that goes on in the buying life cycle, which isn't just acquisition. It's not just supply chain. So widen the lens to look at, how is this really going to be adopted by the organization? What are the implications beyond just the supply chain? What are the implications to the organization if we go with A over B? And to go into that very deeply, to chase that right the way down. What does it really mean? The second thing, which I've alluded to, is ask the suppliers for their help. It shouldn't just be about what they're offering and what price it is. It should be, how else can they help you? Because they're working with all these other providers, just like you. They've got all this knowledge about how people can successfully utilize their offering. Get them involved in helping you more.
Do you think there's a trust factor there? Like, the more you let them in, especially if you're asking them for help and you haven't signed a contract, And, in a lot of cases after the contract signed, you're kind of backing away or maybe, peripherally involved in implementation. How do you walk that line?
I think that's a decision you got to make. If you think this is let's use the term commodity product, that they can't help you much, that the trust isn't required, then yeah, you don't let them in. But if this is something that you believe they have got the knowledge and expertise that they can help, then trust should not be an issue. As part of supply chain, you should make sure that trust is there and that you manage that relationship.
Is it incumbent upon the supply chain professional to help build trust with those that are impacted by the change? Yeah.
Totally. I adamantly believe so. And it's interesting because I do keynotes and I talk about reconnecting sellers with buyers. So I'm not talking the other way around. But it goes this way, that these providers have incredible knowledge about how hospitals are using their product, what the best practices are, what the paths to failure are. They have that knowledge, and I would be seeking to pull it out of them and make them work for it. And obviously then they're investing in you, and hopefully then that's going to be mutually advantageous.
But I think at the hard part on the supply chain side, it's just the amount of volume that comes into their door. I did an interview recently with a well-known supply chain exec, and he gets roughly 700 emails a day. He said 350 roughly are internal, and the other 350 are external. It's salespeople. It's, companies wanting his attention. And it's just, that's the bottleneck. I mean, it's just, they can only take in so much, and they've got so many decisions to do. They also have to be strategic and not necessarily operationally, inclined. So, I think it's a tough role. So it's a difficult path for companies and executives on the supply chain side to navigate.
And hey, you said something very important there. You've got to be strategic too. I think if you're not strategic, you're going to drown. You're going to go into a spiral dive with all of that. You've got to be strategic. You've got to know what the priorities of your organization are. You've got to know how your operation is functioning. And then you've got to be able to judge very quickly all of those incoming things as to what is their value in terms of our priorities and our directions. If there isn't a match there, then they're out. So you've got to have a North Star to judge things against.
In the last couple of years, I think that North Star has been, blurred, at least the last 3 years. But as everybody said, I'm a fireman, I'm a whack-a-mole type of, role right now, because they're just been putting out fires. But now I think the really good ones and the excellent ones, they are much more strategic. Some stayed strategic the whole time, but to your point, you're getting, someone's knocking on your door every other minute, and you've got it, and it's hard if you're a sales exec to get that attention and feel like they don't care. I've got a better product. Yeah, you might. Likely you do, but is it that much better? Is it just incrementally, or is it exponentially better?
But it's, you're reminding me, we've done a lot of research as a result of the pandemic and the lockdown. What are people looking for salespeople for now than 2 years ago? And resoundingly, when we talk to buyers about how they buy and what they expect from salespeople, as a result of the pandemic, and this really is ironic, the number one thing they're asking for is don't waste my time. Now, when did any buyer want a salesperson to waste their time? Right? So it's ironic that has risen to number one as a result of the pandemic. I think there's various reasons for that. But we've all become very, very cognizant of how we spend our time. But however, my point is, people said, I want salespeople to show up informed. I can do my homework about them and their company and would do. I want them to do their homework. I want them, when they come to me, to tell me exactly what it is that they can do for me. Do not tell me what I could get from a website. Do not tell me what I could get from the web, because I can go do that. Tell me what it is you can do for me. So if I was in supply chain, I would turn that right the way back, and I would not talk to anybody who has not done their homework and can't tell me specifically what it is they can offer me. So that would be my first gate. And I think, unfortunately, I'm kind of demoralized to say this. I think 90% of salespeople are going to drop at that gate. And then you've reduced your input to 10%. That's sad, but there it is.
Yeah, so they want you to be a resource. They want you to basically pre-sell the organization as much as possible and have all the knowledge and insight you would possibly need to show them that could be a successful engagement before you're even really starting that sales process, which you said sales representatives are probably only involved in 10% of. All right. So amazingly, well, not amazingly, I knew this conversation would go quickly, but we're just actually about out of time. And I know you wrote a book, and I would just love for you to talk about the book, the process of going through, writing the book, and tell us more about that.
Thanks, Justin. Well, the book came about because of our 20 years of talking to buyers about how they buy. And we've now talked to about 5,000 people in depth about how they buy. And I felt that this is not really well known by the world. Everybody knows why somebody should buy, but they don't know how they're going to buy and why they may not. So the book is called How Customers Buy and Why They Don't. And that's the big one, because here it is. I can save you money. I can save people's lives. Why wouldn't you buy? And they don't every day. So the book, How Customers Buy and Why They Don't, published a couple of years ago. We've had great reviews, and both sides of the fence are reading it, both the sell side and the supply chain side.
All right, Martyn.
That was my question. Was our providers reading it as well?
But Martyn, do you have that in audio? I want you to read that to me in your voice.
That's if only I had more time. My editor and publisher wants to do that. You're so right, Hayes. Yeah,
it would be lovely.
Send to sleep. Yeah.
All right, Martyn.
We'll do that one-on-one,
Yeah, Hayes, actually, you can record it with our producer here. Just schedule a time.
Just hang in here after this.
Hayes will just tune in and listen. He won't even take it on the road. He'll just sit in the background. But
anybody that wants to explore these topics, I can be reached on LinkedIn or through my email, mlewis, one word, MLEWIS, @market-partners.com. I'm only too happy to explore these ideas with anyone at any time. It's become my life.
I think it's fascinating, and it is. I'm really, really happy you came on today. I learned a lot, and I appreciate you doing it.
It's been a pleasure.
Martyn Lewis, everybody, founder and CEO at Market Partners. And Hayes, great conversation. I mean, I know we spent a lot of the beginning of the discussion talking about, really healthcare, selling into healthcare, and what it's like to be on the selling side. But a lot of what we started talking about towards the end was really about the buying process, what that's like, and flipping this script from shifting your focus, if you're a supplier, from selling to actually understanding how the buyer is going through that buying process. I never really thought about that, but even just think about when you start to go shopping for something. I think it's why Facebook, the minute they get a couple of those key terms, or you go on to Amazon, or they're all collecting that. And the next thing you know, you looked at some camping gear and everything on your ads is camping gear. They're getting some artificial intelligence on how we buy. But in healthcare, that's not accessible. It's not part of the plan. And so I think, if after we got done with Martyn, he shared a statistic, the average life cycle from a new product being developed until it actually gets to market recognition that it's an actual product. So it hits that 10% where he was saying 9 to 10% adoption. 1 in 10 hospitals are using it. To get to that point, 17 years, he told us, Hayes.
That was frightening, frankly, just to hear that story. But you said it really well. I mean, as a sales guy, if you're on that side of the equation, you're thinking sales process. But meanwhile, he really talked about the buying process. And that's how a hospital makes its decisions. And that's where the good sales teams can come in and really help the buying process with the information, with everything they need in order to do it correctly, more efficiently. And so I thought he did a really, really good job there, and I enjoyed it immensely.
Yeah, and supply chain totally stretched. You did a great job of just describing the number of emails from that one supply chain executive and what it's like to be in supply chain right now. The supplier community, the vendor partners can really help a lot by doing what he said, which was coming prepared, having the research done in advance, knowing who the stakeholders are at their hospitals who are going to be impacted, what that impact is going to look like, how you're going to help them navigate it. Bringing that value, we hear it a lot, but it's spoken in general terms, right? We need more value from our vendor partners and our suppliers. I hear that from supply chain all the time, but we don't necessarily really boil it down to what they mean is do the legwork up front. If you want my attention, I'm really going to need you to come prepared so that that process on my end as a supply chain professional, executive, or, contracts analyst, whatever, having it pre-prepared is going to help you move through the organization, and it's going to bring a lot of value and help them navigate, a pretty difficult time in healthcare supply chain right now.
Have to agree 100%. I mean, everybody is stretched way too thin. And if you just show up prepared, you've wasted everybody's time, and likely you'll never get another shot. So if I'm a supplier, you better show up and be ready to go, and with a lot of good information.
Yeah. All right. That's going to do it for this show. But as a reminder, the best way to listen to the Power Supply podcast is to download our smartphone app for iPhone and Android. You can find us on any podcast application. So if you're already listening to podcasts, by all means, subscribe. Definitely find us on LinkedIn, Facebook, social media. We want you to engage, like our posts, share our posts, comment. You can also give us feedback by sending us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. And on behalf of Hayes and Gary, who's missing today,
Woohoo!
Thank you for listening to this episode of Power Supply.